Thank you for joining today's virtual public meeting on Forging Ahead. First, the MBTA has a presentation we ask you to please hold, comments until the end of the presentation. Second, we'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being audio and visually recorded and will be made publicly available. Third, we have planned the meeting to go to 8 p.m. tonight with a hard stop at 8:30 p.m. for our interpreters. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few meeting controls for folks who are not familiar with Zoom. Next slide, please. We will have live language interpretation at today's meeting. I will explain how to select your preferred language now in English. Written instructions are provided on your screen now in Spanish. In your meeting webinar controls, at the bottom of your screen, please click Interpretation. Then click the language that you would like to hear. Even participants listening in English should select English so that they can hear any comments being spoken in other languages. For those who have, I apologize, we actually do not have interpretation tonight. That is we have ASL interpreters, so that's my fault on that confusion. This meeting will also include ASL interpreters. The meeting host will spotlight the interpreters to ensure that they can be seen at all times. The ASL interpreters expect to switch approximately every 20 minutes. There may be a minor delay in interpretation while interpreters are being switched. If at any point you cannot see the interpreter, please let the tech support know using the chat. Next slide, please. We also have closed captions for this meeting. By default, subtitles should be appearing at the bottom of your screen. If you do not see the captions, please press the closed caption button to get them started. Next slide, please. Following the presentation, we will first answer clarifying questions from the Q&A feature and then open the floor for comments and testimonials. If you have a clarifying question, please type it into the Q&A pod during following the presentation. Due to time constraints, we may not be able to answer all clarifying questions. All questions will be included in the meeting record. If you have any questions on using the Zoom platform, you may use the chat to MBTA tech support to help resolve any issues you may have. On today's call, we're joined by MBTA Deputy General Manager Jeffrey Gonaville and FMCB Director Crystal Koenige and Chief Administrative Officer David Panagore. We would also like to acknowledge any elected officials that are here today and their staff. I will now turn things over to Deputy General Manager Gonaville to get us started.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us here tonight. As Angel just said, we are joined by Fiscal Management Control Board member Crystal Koenige, the MBTA's Chief Administrative Officer Dave Panagore, and multiple MBTA staff members to help clarify any questions you may have. As a Deputy General Manager of the Authority, I want to emphasize to you that we do not want to reduce service. The MBTA has been working significantly over the past several years to improve and be better for our riders. We have expanded our ability to deliver capital improvements, consistently delivering over $1 billion of investment each year, which results in tangible improvements in safety, efficiency, and reliability. The MBTA wants to continue improving as an agency so that we can serve the region better. The pandemic has changed where and how people travel, resulting in a significant drop in ridership and fare revenue. A year ago, over 1.3 million trips were taken daily on the MBTA. Today, that number is nearly 330,000. Even so, the MBTA is still running essentially the same level of service that we ran a year ago. That means that there are near empty trains, buses, boats, and vans out there today. Because of this, we are projecting a $579 million budget gap for fiscal year 22. We will present to you tonight a three-pronged approach to addressing this issue with internal efficiency changes, capital funding reallocation, and lastly, service cuts, which are our last resort. It's important to note that ridership did not decrease the same amount across the entire system. While there are commuter rail trains that are empty, there are bus lines running at over 60% of their pre-COVID ridership. That means that those buses are at or above the COVID crowding standards we established for public safety earlier this year. Given the unequal changes in ridership and budgetary impacts that COVID-19 has had on the MBTA, is undergoing this process to protect our essential services and the riders that depend on them. In this resource-constrained environment, it is the moral obligation for the MBTA to preserve the services that our transit-critical populations depend on: communities of color, low-income communities, and communities without access to cars. These are the groups that we're aiming to protect through this process. Without additional resources, the MBTA has no choice but to make difficult decisions. We're choosing to prioritize service to transit-critical populations, and that means hard conversations ahead. Today, we'll provide an overview of what we have identified as essential services. We will also propose a set of packages for where to add back services when resources are available. No fare increases are being proposed at this time, and I'll repeat that. There is no fare increase that's being proposed. If there was going to be a fare increase, it would have to go through a separate public process. These proposed service changes would not take effect immediately. Some changes in the commuter rail service could take effect as early as January. Changes to the ferry service could happen as early as March. Changes to the rapid transit would be made in the spring, and changes to the buses in the summer. The FMCB is scheduled to vote on the changes on December 7th, so that planning can begin for making the changes in 2021. Most of the service changes are not intended to be permanent. We will bring back higher levels of service as when ridership demand and travel patterns change, and there is durable revenue to support it. In some cases, particularly for non-essential bus routes and commuter rail, changes to pre-COVID service may be appropriate in order to reflect post-COVID changes in commuting and other travel patterns. We will restore service in response to ridership and in line with our planning to transform these services. A question we've been asked frequently throughout the last public meetings is, why wouldn't the T use more revenue, like federal stimulus funds, to stop service cuts if you can? The MBTA is adjusting service in response to lower ridership and budgetary needs. The T is committed to providing essential service for riders who rely most on the T for reliable transit, including low-income people, people of color, seniors, people with disabilities, and people in zero and low vehicle households. The MBTA will, of course, make use of all available state and federal resources to ensure the continuation of such essential services. At the same time, non-essential services should be reduced to match current ridership until demand rebounds. Using limited resources to operate nearly empty trains, ferries, and buses is not a responsible use of the funding provided by riders, communities, and taxpayers, and does not help support the transportation needs of our region. Saving resources now by reducing underutilized non-essential services will help ensure the MBTA has the ability to bring back service in a sustainable and prudent manner in response to ridership demands after the pandemic has faded. I do want to reemphasize how I started. We do not want to reduce service. We truly appreciate each of you for joining us here tonight, and I look forward to answering your clarifying questions. Angel?
Thank you, Deputy General Manager Gonaville. Now I'd like to turn it over and welcome Mike Muller, our Assistant General Manager for Strategic Initiatives, who will lead us through the presentation and proposed service changes under consideration. Mike?
Thank you, Angel. My name is Mike Muller. I'm the Assistant General Manager for Strategic Initiatives at the MBTA, and I'll be presenting our service proposals, explaining some of the details of the proposed changes, and providing some background information on why the changes are necessary. Before we get to the main Forging Ahead presentation, I wanted to share some updates on COVID-related fare pilots for commuter rail. First, we are extending the Lynn Zone 1A pilot through the end of this fiscal year, so through June 30th, 2021. So bus and Blue Line riders will be able to continue using the commuter rail from Lynn to promote social distancing and hopefully to provide some relief to the Blue Line and nearby bus routes, which are more prone to crowding than commuter rail right now. We're also extending the 5-day flex pass on commuter rail to June 30th. And we're extending reduced fares for youth pass holders on all commuter rail zones through June 30th as well. And again, our goal here is to continue to provide options for riders during the pandemic. Now on to forging ahead. What is forging ahead? Let's start with some background and context. Forging ahead is our plan to preserve essential service for the riders who depend most on the MBTA to get where they need to go. This is a three-pronged effort. Although tonight we'll focus primarily on service changes, we want you to know this was our last resort. First, before even considering service reductions, we looked internally and identified areas where we can cut costs and save resources without impacting operations. And we are making those internal spending cuts. Next, we looked at our capital program and identified projects we can pause or defer and then reallocate the funds to support the operating budget. And then finally, again, as a last resort, after the first two strategies were exhausted, we looked at possible service reductions, and we'll be discussing those proposals with you tonight. The intent of service reductions is to preserve the services that are most essential and critical, which allows us to husband our resources so we can continue to operate. As we respond to this crisis, we're also looking ahead toward recovery, and we're driven by our goal to build on all of the great work the MBTA has done over the past few years to improve our capital program and plan a better network for the future. The MBTA is not alone in this. This is an industry-wide problem across public transit agencies in this country. Our peers in New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and LA, just to name a few, are facing similar challenges. New York in particular, which is a much bigger system than ours, is facing a catastrophic budget loss and proposing much more severe service cuts than what we'll be discussing tonight. Obviously, the information on this slide sort of cries out for federal intervention in the form of a transportation stimulus package. And although the MBTA joined our peer agencies in publicly calling for federal relief, it remains unknown if and when any kind of a federal relief package would be enacted. This is the MBTA operating budget at a glance. Just to put the budget gap into perspective, our operating budget is about $2.3 billion a year. About 1.8 billion of that is operating expenses, and 500 million is debt service. The operating expenses include wages and pension payments for the employees who operate the system, materials and supplies to maintain the vehicles and infrastructure to keep our employees and customers safe, and it also includes the operating contracts for commuter rail, ferry, and the ride. A budget deficit of $600 million is about a 25% gap in the operating budget. The MBTA looked at 3 different revenue scenarios, which we'll talk about in a moment. In the worst of these 3 scenarios, the MBTA would be facing a budget deficit of $579 million for fiscal year 22, which begins July 1st. Because that number is so big, we are taking steps now in the current fiscal year, FY21, to address that by building reserves that we can use to reduce the need for even greater spending cuts next year. I mentioned the 3-prong approach. The pie chart on the right shows the 3 potential funding sources we're working with to address the budget gap. The largest share is capital reallocation, shown in blue, and you can see the internal cost cutting there in green, and the proposed service reduction savings in orange. So as you can see, the vast majority of our proposed budget savings come from delaying our capital program or reducing internal spending, sources other than the service changes. It's also important to note that all 3 of these efforts, capital reallocation, internal cost cutting, and service reductions, are related. For example, if we run more service than we're proposing, we'll need to further reduce our capital program. The chart here shows how our ridership fell significantly as the pandemic escalated in early March and how it's slowly recovering. As you can see, it has remained relatively stable since early September. Each mode here is represented by a different color line, and you can see how the different modes have recovered at different rates. Blue line, bus, and paratransit ridership have seen the most ridership recovery throughout the pandemic, followed by our orange, red, and green line ridership, silver line bus, and at the bottom there you can see commuter rail and ferry have the lowest ridership as a percentage of pre-COVID ridership. Although ridership is significantly reduced, we are providing the same level of service we did prior to the pandemic when we were serving 1.3 million daily trips. We're now serving 330,000 daily trips, which is about 25% of ridership, with the same level of service. This means, unfortunately, we are running empty trains, ferries, and buses, as the Deputy General Manager pointed out a moment ago. As I mentioned, we're doing some scenario planning along with Mass DOT to think about how the region and our ridership might recover. Not only has ridership responded differently mode by mode since the start of the pandemic, we also expect it to return differently as we emerge from the pandemic. We developed 3 potential ridership scenarios for each mode based on future travel patterns, including telework, the timing of vaccines, the regional economic recovery. We looked at each of these scenarios by mode to ensure that however the situation plays out, based on the factors I just mentioned, we can be prepared to meet demand and ridership when it returns and where. Based on these scenarios, ridership is not expected to reach pre-pandemic levels on any mode before June of 2022. So that's why this is really a multi-year budget issue, not just a problem to solve for the next 6 months. And finally, the scenario planning will help inform how we build service back and create a better network for riders and communities through initiatives like Rail Vision and bus network redesign. Forging ahead is an iterative process, and we're only on step 1. At this point in the process, we're focused on preserving our essential services. In order to do that in the current environment, we need to reduce services with lower ridership and redirect those resources to keep operating the essential services. We are interested in your feedback in how we're defining essential services, and we'll talk more in the next few slides about the terms we're using to categorize different services in this process. The service changes we'll be discussing are only proposals at this point, and nothing will be decided until mid-December. In terms of timing, most service changes would not be implemented until next spring, with the exception of some commuter rail changes, which could happen in January. This is an iterative process, and we will continue reviewing service on a semi-annually or quarterly basis, which is our current practice, and we'll add back services in response to ridership and demand. This is the framework we're using to define essential services. This is a 2x2 matrix categorizing services in terms of ridership and transit critical customers, which includes a combination of low income, 0 to low car households, communities of color, people with disabilities, and seniors. The services in the top left box are those with both high transit critical riders and high ridership potential services. These are our essential services. This includes all rapid transit, including the Mattapan line, 80 bus routes, and the Fairmount commuter rail line. Our intent is to continue running all essential services at or above our service delivery policy, which was established in 2017 and defines the minimum acceptable standards for hours of operations, frequency, and crowding. So taking a look at where we are in this process, On November the 9th, we presented our initial proposals to the MBTA's Fiscal and Management Control Board. We're currently in the public engagement period. This is the 8th of 11 public meetings. The proposals are subject to change based on feedback during this process, and there will be no decision on these proposals until the board votes on December 14th. Implementation will vary by mode. For commuter rail, if approved, the suspension of weekend service would start in January, with the remainder of commuter rail changes happening in May. Ferry service would be suspended in March, and changes to rapid transit frequency would happen in March as well. Bus service changes would be implemented in late June, and changes to the ride service area will be implemented in conjunction with these other changes. Once implemented, we are planning to revisit these changes for all modes at least twice a year, and we'll continue to review and refine based on ridership. We typically adjust commuter rail and ferry schedules twice a year, and we adjust rapid transit and bus service 4 times a year. Now I'm going to walk you through the proposed changes. So going back to the framework we're using to define essential service. Essential services are in the top left box, which is highlighted in yellow here. And again, those are the services that serve high transit critical populations and have high ridership potential. For perspective, 82% of all trips being taken this fall were on one of these essential services. Base service is the service level we are proposing, which is the majority of essential service plus a reduced level of non-essential service. Base service includes all essential services plus a reduced amount of non-essential services. For many using essential services, service will continue to look very similar to pre-COVID. Because we're projecting lower ridership, service reductions are not expected to significantly increase crowding. And again, we will adjust service quarterly or semi-annually by mode to continue to match resources with increasing ridership and demand. We'll operate all essential services at or above the service delivery policy for frequency, span, and crowding. And again, these essential services I'm referring to are the Fairmount commuter rail line, all rapid transit, including Mattapan, about 80 bus routes, and the ride with policy changes. Base service also includes a reduced level of non-essential services based on demand and alternatives. This includes reduced peak service on all other commuter rail lines, those other than the Fairmount line, and reduced frequency on remaining bus routes, including smaller service area and consolidated routes. In our proposals, most MBTA service is preserved. We're preserving 82% of weekday trips, which are on essential services, 18% of weekday trips that are on non-essential services, and 3% of current weekday trips will lack access or have to divert due to proposed changes. Base service represents 85% of bus, 70% of rapid transit, 65% of commuter rail, and no ferry service. Under this proposal, 78.5% of households in the MBTA service area have MBTA service within half a mile compared to 82% previously. If you look at the map on the right, the blue lines represent service at or above baseline frequency standards. The yellow lines represent service below baseline standards, and the red lines represent service we propose eliminating. So specific to the region for this particular call, this map depicts the North Shore service, and again, like the previous slide, the blue lines represent service at or above baseline frequency standards. The yellow lines represent service below baseline levels, and the red lines represent services proposed for elimination. And we'll get into the specifics on the next few slides. So this slide shows all essential bus routes, which will be operating at or above baseline standards. And you will note here, specifically for the North Shore audience, that the bus routes in the red font, that would be 116, 117, 424, 429, and 455, are part of essential service, which will remain at or above baseline service. The proposed changes specifically affecting the North Shore, the following bus routes will have possible frequency below the baseline. That's the route 426, 430, 435, 436, 439, 441, 442, and 450. The following bus routes are proposed for elimination. It's the 428, the 434, the 451, 456, 465. Also, the elimination of the Suburban Subsidy Program, which partially funds 5 additional services in Bedford, Beverly, Burlington, Lexington, and Mission Hill. And then on the Newberry-Rockport line, which serves the North Shore for commuter rail, there will be no weekend service, no service after 9 p.m. on weekdays, and Pride's Crossing Station would be closed under our proposals. So looking at commuter rail ridership as it stands, we're approximately at 13% of normal pre-COVID ridership. We're running about 85% of regular service in September and October. That was 435 trains versus the 505 trains previously. Starting with the fall schedule change on November the 2nd, we smoothed out service throughout the day and we increased the number of trains to 544 trains. But as you can see, we're still running far below pre-COVID levels in terms of ridership. In terms of commuter rail changes system-wide, we propose stopping all service after 9 p.m. The Fairmount line will remain active a little bit later and stop service a little bit closer to 10 p.m. We plan to stop all weekend service, with the Fairmount line being replaced by bus. We propose decreasing weekday peak service and some midday service, reducing from 505 trains, which is what we were running in fall 2019, to 430 trains, retaining 85% of weekday service. And then, as I mentioned before, we propose closing 6 commuter rail stops based on low ridership, operational impacts, as well as availability of nearby alternatives. In terms of the decreased weekday peak service, specific service levels on a line-by-line basis will take into account ridership patterns line by line based on the fall schedule. And again, these changes in terms of the decreased weekday peak service would not be effective until May of 2021. Looking at the proposed station closures, the stations are Plimptonville, Pride's Crossing, Silver Hill, Hastings, Plymouth, and Cedar Park. All of these stations have low ridership. 5 out of 6 are not currently accessible. We're currently seeing extremely low ridership compared to pre-COVID. And each of these stations have an alternative station relatively nearby with available parking. Looking at bus ridership, we're at about 41% pre-COVID. We are seeing, however, significant variation route by route. For example, the Route 111 bus is at about 60%, whereas the Silver Line 2 is at 20%. So some significant variation there, as you might expect. And 21 routes have, we're currently running higher than, or close to pre-COVID service level system-wide, although we have distributed service differently to account for different ridership patterns and to support social distancing. 21 routes have significantly more service than pre-COVID to help prevent crowding. For example, the routes 22, 23, 66, 111, 116, 117, and 109. The proposed bus changes at a glance: we would stop all service after midnight, but no changes to the start of service or the days of operation. We're proposing reduced frequency on essential and non-essential routes. We would reduce frequency on essential routes by 5% on average system-wide. The reduction would vary route by route and by time of day. In some cases, there's likely no change versus pre-COVID service levels, especially for routes like the 111, 116, 117, and 109. This is all based on ridership. We would also reduce frequency on non-essential bus routes by 20% on average system-wide, and the reduction would also vary route by route and by time of day. Out of 169 MBTA routes, we propose consolidating 14 routes, shortening 5 routes, and eliminating 25 routes. Of the eliminated routes, 7 are within a quarter mile of an alternative bus or rapid transit, so no riders would be stranded. 12 routes serve non-transit critical low ridership trips, and 6 of those routes serve high transit critical riders, but have very low ridership and have significant but not fully accessible alternatives. We propose eliminating the suburban subsidy program, which partially funds 5 additional services in Bedford, Beverly, Burlington, Lexington, and Mission Hill, but are serving fewer than 200 average weekday riders. And about 1.1% of pre-COVID ride trips would be shifted from ADA to premium service. No changes would be made to the overall geographic coverage area, though the hours of operation might change based on changes to other modes. We also propose lengthening the scheduling window from 30 to 40 minutes. All operating routes will continue to be reviewed for crowding and adjusted as part of quarterly service planning processes, including social distancing guidelines. Taking a look at rapid transit ridership. For heavy rail and the Green Line trunk, in general, on weekdays, we're seeing 24% of pre-COVID ridership. You can see the variation by each line. Blue line is at 37% of pre-COVID ridership, green line at 20%, orange line at 26%, and red line at 22%. The changes we're proposing to rapid transit are to stop all service after midnight versus the current stop of service at 1 a.m., but no changes to the start of service. We propose reducing frequency by 20% across all rapid transit lines, though that may vary line by line and by time of day based on ridership. We will, as we mentioned before for the other modes, this will be reviewed and adjusted as part of a quarterly service planning process, and the implementation timeline may be adjusted based on state and federal guidelines for social distancing. We propose stopping Green Line E-Branch service at Brigham Circle, diverting E-Branch riders at 5 stops along 0.8 of a mile to the Route 39. And the Route 39 service would be increased and crowding will be reviewed as part of quarterly service planning. Looking at the proposed changes to the ferry service, we propose stopping all ferry service as part of Forging Ahead. Charlestown to Boston service was flagged as potentially essential service, but due to very low ridership during the COVID-19 pandemic and a highly redundant service with the Route 93 bus, we propose stopping that ferry service. The Route 93 bus currently has minimal crowding and can support the diverted riders. And again, we'll review this as part of a quarterly service planning process. So now we'll talk about how to prioritize building back. On the next slide, I'm going to go over some service packages that would be considered for adding back service as ridership and demand returns as we emerge from the pandemic. Service packages are thematic groupings of service additions in addition to base service, meant to enable policy-level discussion on returning service. The public engagement process that we're going through right now, as well as input from the Fiscal and Management Control Board, will inform the prioritization of these service packages, as well as to highlight whether or not other service packages should be considered. If more funding becomes available in December, either based on trade-offs that are made or external events, we may be able to add service packages to base services sooner. Understanding the preferences and prioritization of members of the public and our board will also be useful if additional funding in spring of 2021 becomes available in order to make these decisions faster. So now to just quickly go through the service packages for consideration in terms of adding back service as ridership and demand return. For rapid transit, we could restore frequency to pre-Forging Ahead levels, which would add an additional $14 million. We could restore evening service on rapid transit for $3 million more. The commuter rail service packages are restoring weekend service for $15 million for full restoration of weekend service, or $7 million for partial. And the cost of restoring evening service on commuter rail is $7 million. For bus, for $7 million more, we can restore frequency to essential bus routes. For another $7 million, we could restore frequency on non-essential bus routes. And restoring evening service on bus is another $3 million. For ferry, restoring partial ferry service to Charlestown is another $1.5 million. And restoring partial ferry service to Hingham and Hull is an additional $2 million. So before we open it up for comments and questions, just to briefly restate, we are very interested in your feedback to help us inform whether or not we've gotten it right in terms of what should be included in the base service, the way that we're defining essential and non-essential services, and the way we should prioritize potentially adding different services back as ridership and demand materializes as we emerge from the pandemic. Please, we're looking for you to tell us which of the proposed changes will have the most impact to you. Are there particular adjustments to routes, span of service, or frequency that will restore your access? And again, how should we prioritize adding back service as resources and ridership return? And this concludes the Forging Ahead presentation. I'll turn it back over to Angel Donahue Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mike, for the presentation. So now we're gonna do some clarifying questions. So clarified questions can be submitted via the QA pod. While we may not get to all questions, all comments are part of the official meeting record and will be shared with the MBTA leadership. Next slide, please. To make a comment, you must virtually raise your hand. To do this on the computer, please press Alt-Y or click the raise hand button at the bottom center of your screen. On a mobile device, tap the raise hand button at the bottom center of your screen. On the phone, dial *9. Once you raise your hand, you'll be added to a queue with others who have raised their hands. I will call on folks on a first come, first serve basis. When it is your turn to speak, I will say your last name or the last four digits of your phone number and let you know that I'm unmuting you. If you're on a computer or mobile device, a box will pop up at the center of your screen. You will need to confirm that you'd like to be unmuted before you begin speaking. If you're on the phone, an automated recording will let you know that you are unmuted. You may speak as soon as the recording finishes. Once you're unmuted, everyone in the meeting can hear you. Before making your comment, please slowly state your name and any organizational affiliation. Please remember to speak slowly as we have interpreters working with us this evening. Please limit all comments to no more than 90 seconds. We ask that you only make comments so that we can ensure you only make one comment so we can ensure that everyone gets an opportunity to speak. As soon as you're finished, you will be muted again. Interpreters may pause for some questions and could potentially switch in between rooms. I am going to look at some clarifying questions that some folks, well, looks like we do not have any clarifying questions at the moment. I am going to, before I'm going to ask some elected officials that I see on the line to ask them if they have any comments they'd like to make, and then we'll open it up to some other folks. I believe that Senator Joan Lovely is on the line, and Senator, I'm going to ask to unmute you, allow you to talk. So the floor will be yours in 1 second. Just looking you up. Senator Lovely.
Yes, hello. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. This was very informative to see how these adjustments will impact the commuters, particularly to the North Shore. A couple of comments about the commuter rail cutbacks. I certainly can understand the Pride's Crossing. It's a very low ridership at that particular station. I am concerned, and I'm hearing concerns from constituents about completely eliminating weekend service and service after 9 o'clock weekdays. Now, I don't know, I did not see, or perhaps I don't understand what the daytime schedule will look like, if that will stay primarily intact, or if some of those daytime stops can be eliminated for the opportunity to have at least one weekend trip, you know, to and from the North Shore to Boston for those workers that rely on the commuter rail to get to work on the weekends primarily. So that's what I'm hearing relative to that. I'll reserve my comments and perhaps put those in writing for the bus service. It seems to be a little more robust, and certainly the ferry service will have to be take the adjustment as well. But the commuter rail, and even though we do see that the ridership is significantly less, likely because most workers are working from home at the moment, consideration to at least have one trip in and out on the weekend, maybe on both days or Saturday, and as well as maybe one last trip out of Boston, you know, after the 9 o'clock hour, particularly to the commuter rail. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator. Much appreciated. And I see State Representative Brad Hill's on the line as well. Representative, I'm going to ask to allow you to talk and unmute you. Representative?
Thank you, Angel, and I too will be very quick, like Senator Lovely was. Before I give you my remarks, I just want to say, Mike, thank you for the presentation. That was very, very informative, and I know a lot of time and energy has gone into this exercise, which is a very similar exercise to what the state's going through and our local governments are going through. I too am very concerned, and am hearing from my constituents about the elimination of weekend service. I have a lot of commuters, and I say a lot, a few, who are employees in Boston who do not have any way to get into Boston to get to their jobs. And I think the last thing we want to do right now is take a job away from somebody when we're trying to get the economy back up and running, especially our medical and public safety personnel who are needed so badly through this pandemic. So I too would echo what Senator Lovely said, is we need to at least have a train bringing them into Boston, and then of course bringing them back home afterwards. And I hope that you can reconsider the weekend service part of the elimination proposal that has been put forth. We're very concerned also about what the metrics will be used in restoring services when the spring comes back. As you know, the North Shore heavily depends on its tourism industry for its economy. And if the weekend service is completely cut and is not restored in a timely fashion, our economy here on the North Shore would really just be horrible. So we're hoping, and we can get these questions answered later, Angel, I need to know what metrics going to be used to get us that restored service on the weekend, because without it during the spring and summertime, we will be in dire straits, and I know that's not the intent. So my 2 minutes is up. I appreciate you giving us the time to voice our concerns to you, and we will talk again.
Thank you, Representative. I'm happy to follow up with you afterwards and to hear you out as well. Again, for folks that like to speak, I ask that you use the raise hand feature on Zoom. I am now going to unmute Mr. Joshua Brown. Mr. Brown?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, like the senator said, yeah, I am concerned about the cuts being made on the commuter rail, and I also hope you reconsider the weekend service on the commuter rail, because I would also be affected by it. And I have a couple of friends who can't speak on Zoom tonight. They said they'll also be affected by it because they take that service like from, from Fitchburg into Boston because they are like essential workers, and Fitchburg doesn't have that much job opportunity, especially during the pandemic. And as far as like bus service goes, yeah, that would be a big killer right there for a lot of people, because especially the elderly, because sometimes like Uber can't be like enough, and most of the time it's next to impossible to get an Uber as well as a cab. And I'm like, I understand it's the pandemic or anything, but with the pandemic going on, having more buses out there, it's actually made it a lot safer on the buses and the commuter rail with less people riding.
Thank you. I am now going to unmute Representative-elect Sally Cairns. Give me 1 second. Representative-elect, you should be unmuted.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I am speaking tonight, as I said, I'm a elected but not yet sworn in representative, so I'm speaking more as a prospective legislator. The bus routes have been a concern of mine for some time. I live in Danvers, and the district I will represent includes Danvers, West Peabody, and Middleton. we have no access to rail, no ability to quickly get to a train station by any of these bus routes. And I am sad to say that neither the 435, 436, or the 465, from my perspective, are useful. They're empty, and it's not COVID related. They lumber through town empty and have for years. So I guess I'm applauding that you're eliminating an unnecessary route. That would be the 465. At the same time, my community pays, I think, a $500,000 MBTA subsidy. We certainly appreciate the need for public transportation and we want to support it, but would be hopeful that we can get a reconfigured bus that gives you the ability to drive to downtown Danvers and get quickly to a train, either in Beverly or Salem, without the circuitous trip through the malls of those other bus routes. So with that, I will leave it there and thank you for the opportunity and for your consideration of our needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative-elect. Next, I am going to unmute Mr. Constantino Giorgio. Apologize if I mispronounced your last name.
That's okay. Thank you for unmuting me. My name's Costa. I'm a college student here in the North Shore area. I am based out of Lynn, Massachusetts, but I live more so close to the Swampscott commuter rail station. And as a student who does not have easy access to the programs at my school that would allow me to get reduced commuter rail funding, if it would be possible to extend the Lynn pilot to Swampscott, that would be extremely helpful to myself as well as other groups of students that live in the area. Just because it is closer. Some of us don't have access to vehicles, and the walk from where I live in Lynn to the Swampscott station versus the Lynn station is much more convenient for me. And if I could get the reduced fares, I would be able to attend my classes in person more frequently. And I have not been able to do so all semester because the fares have been would be too expensive for me because I don't have the monetary means. So I don't know how the budget or what the budget is, and I know that you guys are definitely losing money right now. But if that's something that could be considered, that I would greatly appreciate that as a student in Boston. Thank you so much for the time. Thank you.
I would like to just pose a clarifying question for panelists to just kind of answer. Someone had asked from Mr. Brian Mielis, I believe, on the chat. Clarifying question: how does the Salem ferry factor into the plan, if at all?
So I can take that if you want,
Yep.
Angel. So essentially, again, Jeff Gonneville, Deputy General Manager for the MBTA. The Salem ferry is not one of the ferries that is operated by the MBTA. I believe it is operated by our contractor, but it is not operated by the MBTA. So that is not one of the ferries that is proposed, or ferry services that is proposed for elimination by the MBTA. Our ferry services are focused really on Hingham, Hull, and Charlestown routes only.
Thank you. Again, folks, if you'd like to raise your participate or be recognized, we ask that you use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. And if you're on the phone, we ask that you use *9 to raise your hand. We're here to listen to folks today regarding our Forging Ahead proposal. Next, I'm going to unmute Martha Reardon-Bewick.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so very much for this opportunity. I'm Martha Reardon-Bewick, a Hingham ferry advocate since 1974. The Hingham Shipyard, or Hingham Intermodal Center, is surprisingly the second largest of the 15 completed MBTA transit-oriented development projects, second only to Assembly Square. Based on a current survey of 5 private developers and tax records, we know that over $500 million has been invested in 894 condominiums and apartments adjacent to the Hingham Ferry Terminal over the past 10 years, including an estimated 160 affordable units. The community immediately adjacent to the Hingham Ferry Terminal is now approximately 1,500 individuals, and there's still new residents moving in. Shipyard development includes 240,000 square feet of commercial, office, retail, and restaurant space, as well with park area and harbor walkways. Private developers at Hingham Shipyard have said publicly that the ferries to Hingham drove their investment decisions of over $500 million. I'm raising this question because I don't know the answer, but what is the obligation of the Commonwealth to this partnership in economic development, this transit-oriented development? I believe the scale of private investment here requires continuation of the core essential ferry services, or at least the provision of base ferry services to Hingham and the South Shore, around which this transit-oriented development has flourished. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martha.
Thank you. Next, I am going to unmute Mr. William Bernardino.
Hello.
Hello, Mr.
Hey,
Bernardino. Can you hear me?
thank you for letting me speak. My name is Bill Berardino. I'm the Vice President of the Boston Commons Union. I would like to just start off by saying COVID-19, we have a vaccine that would be ready and available, hopefully in a few weeks, that we are against all cutting of all essential routes, rails. It would be catastrophic and impact the lives of all the MBTA riders and employees you are servicing, to low-income communities that depend on the bus train service to get to work, school, doctor's appointments, etc. I'm also wondering about the data that you have with the ridership on these heavy routes. There hasn't been a tabulator out in the field for over 6 years now. Where are these numbers coming from? Because if you look at the 110, 111, 116, 117, 109, 104, they are packed. There's 40 to 50 people on a bus. So I would like to know where those numbers come from, that it's low ridership. We got buses that service in the Beverly, Salem, Saugus, Wakefield, Reading area to get to the Reading commuter rail. That is a highly packed bus routes also. They're coming in from all areas in New Hampshire to get on these services. So I believe that you should hang on, wait a little bit, wait till we get this vaccine in, maybe look at it down the line, but absolutely zero cuts should be made. Thank you.
So maybe, Angel, I'll just quickly comment to that. Bill, thank you for your testimony, and just a couple remarks. First off, obviously, cutting of services is, as I said in my opening, last resort. It is not what we want to do. And just to go back, and I think this, I don't know if folks can see this, but this was the slide that Mike had shown in his presentation that highlighted the essential bus routes. As Bill said, he's absolutely right. These routes are filled. And these are routes, though, that we know have ridership, and we know that are at levels that we want to sustain or continue operating those routes. Due to the financial situation that we're in, we may be changing the frequency on these routes, but we will not be eliminating them. And then, Bill, just to get very, very technical on the answer as it relates to your ridership, the buses that are operating along these routes have the automated passenger counter systems. So on a daily basis, our teams are getting information on where passengers are boarding and alighting from each of these buses due to those APC systems. So the old I guess poll takers that were out there with their clipboards checking off, riders getting on and off buses at stops that we did every couple of years. That now has been replaced with these APC technical systems.
Thank you, Deputy General Manager. I'm going to, I have a clarifying question here. You're talking about reviewing the service at the usual rate of twice a year for some features and 4 times a year for others. Do you think that that with the uncertainties that we have, these could be reviewed more frequently?
So a couple things. First off, we have within a lot of our union bargaining agreements, we have contractual schedules that we pick work with. Now, we just heard from the vice president of the Boston Carmen's Union, and they have been a great partner and collaborated very closely with us throughout the pandemic to really work with us as we have to make some of the on-the-fly changes to the schedules. So certainly right now, doing the changes to the MBTA system, bus and rapid transit and streetcar Green Line systems 4 times a year. Typically on the commuter rail, we make those changes twice a year. Now, we have been in similar conversations with Keolis, who is our contractor, about could we potentially change the frequency of those schedule changes. And along with that, they also have contractual agreements with their workforce and their workforce's representative unions with Keolis. So those discussions are ongoing, and certainly we understand the intent of the question, which is that obviously giving us the flexibility to pivot and change these schedules that allow us to react to changing situations as it relates to the pandemic and as it relates to ridership demands. And so we can't answer that question right now, but those are certainly things that we are working with both our contractors and our internal workforce to come up with some possible changes.
Thank you, Deputy General Manager. The next person I am going to unmute is Ms. Laura Tenney.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Hi, thank you, Angel. I'm a weekday rider and a regular pass holder. I'm actually keeping my monthly pass going right now because my company subsidizes it and riding about once a week. But I wanted to actually speak to the weekend ridership, but just echo Representative Hill. As a resident of Manchester, I can see how much our local economy is dependent on tourism and visitors from the city coming up on the commuter rail and visiting our shops and businesses and beaches. And particularly right now with COVID, I think people wanting to get outside and enjoy, a little bit less density. So I would advocate for weekend ridership, weekend commuter rail being one of the first things that you restore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe Mr. Jim Bradley had his hand raised. Mr. Bradley, did you want to speak? I'm unmuting you.
Yes, I'm Jim Bradley. I'm the Financial Secretary Treasurer for Local 589. Billy pretty much summed it up very well for us. Again, any service cuts or reductions in service are going to have detrimental effects on both the essential workers that need to take the service to get to their jobs to help out with COVID and everything else, and it's also going to have detrimental effects on the workforce that the MBTA currently has. There really needs to be a hard look at the costs involved with retraining a workforce that they have already invested in if they were to release them. And that really needs to be considered also before the Fiscal Control Board votes and makes any decisions that's going to affect this workforce. I'll be quick, so thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. And again, as I said earlier, we certainly appreciate the collaboration that you have had with us throughout this entire crisis.
Again, I'd like to remind folks, if they would like to speak and be recognized, we ask that you use the raise your hand feature or send a chat. And if you're on the phone, to use *9. We really do want to hear from folks about the proposed service changes that we are considering. I do not see any hands raised at the moment, so I encourage you to use that. I am going to, I see a clarifying question here that I'm going to pull up. Will consideration be given to provide some bus shuttle service to supplement the loss of weekend commuter rail service? Is it possible to provide some service for it to bring workers in and out?
So I think thank you for the feedback, and certainly that is a bit of a comments that we have received from other meetings as well. So thank you.
Thank you. I am now going to unmute Mr. Brian Kane.
Thank you, Angel. Thank you, Mike, for the presentation. Mr. Gonaville, thank you as well. My name is Brian Kane. I'm the Acting Executive Director of the MBTA Advisory Board. The MBTA Advisory Board is an independent agency comprised of the 176 cities and towns that form the MBTA Service District. Our members are the chairs of boards of selectmen and mayors of the cities and towns that make up the MBTA area. And these communities contribute over 170 million to the MBTA's operating budget each year in the form of municipal assessments. With respect to your question, to Mr. Muller's question about how the authority should prioritize bringing back service, the advisory board calls tonight and in the next few days will continue to call for the creation of what we're calling a return to service commission, comprised of municipalities, chambers of commerce, regional planning agencies, regional transit authorities, employees, employers, and other stakeholders with an interest in MBTA service. This commission should be charged to work with MBTA employees, as well as with the independent central transportation planning staff, to take in ridership, traffic, and other types of data that will be used to determine which and when services will return and in what order. Secondly, this commission should be headed by an independent, neutral third party and not the MBTA or MassDOT. With due respect to the T, there are trust issues and have been for many years. Placing a third party in charge and having it report to the FMCB and its successor board of directors is the best way to ensure that there is trust and faith in the process to bring back service, and that it will be decided by a neutral, data-driven third party who understands all of the constraints. The advisory board calls on the FMCB to appoint such a commission and make this part of whatever service packages are approved at its upcoming meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Next, again, one more time, I'd like to just remind folks, if you like to be recognized, to use the raise your hand feature, and if you're on the phone, to use *9 if you'd like to be recognized. Next, I'm going to mute Ms. Kathy Paul. Ms. Paul? Hello? I think I'm having a bit of an issue here with unmuting. Ms. Paul, you just been asked to unmute.
Unmute.
Can you hear us?
There you go.
We hear.
Can you hear us?
We can.
Yep, we can hear you.
Can you?
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, I'm Kathy Paul. I'm first vice president on the state board and president on, I'm also on the New Lynn Coalition. People in Lynn and surrounding areas, it's hard to get to Boston. With all these new condos and everything, and even if you had a car, where do you park in Boston? There's no place to park. If you cut all these services, people had no choice but to get to work and drive a car. Well, after you get into Boston, where do you put your car? You can't deflate it and put it in your backpack. It won't fit. Also, you had nothing to say about the 455 bus. Now you're talking about eliminating the 426. I get on the bus outside the main library in Lynn, on the common there. It's either the 426 or the 455. You didn't say nothing about the 455. You did say you want to eliminate the 426. But either bus will get me to Wonderland so that I can get to Boston to appointments and and things. But what about the 455? People need to get to work. The people who live in Lynn, there's not many of us left because everywhere you look, there's condos going up. But we're the low-income people. We need to be remembered. We do ride the transportation. Seniors and handicapped, we need to get to where we're going. You got to stop punishing people because they use the MBTA. We're the ones who support the MBTA. Why are you killing us? It's not right. It's not fair. When's it going to end? Thank you.
So Kathy, just a couple of points. Again, we do not want to be reducing service right now. The 426 and the 455 are not routes that we're proposing to eliminate. So we will not be eliminating the 455 or the 426. There may be some slight schedule adjustments that we're making to the route, but there will not be, we are not eliminating the 455 or the 426.
Thank you, Deputy General Manager. I do not see any hands raised. Again, folks, we're here to listen to you and get your feedback. We will be here till 8 o'clock, and we made that promise. We will continue to do that. If you would like to speak and be recognized, please use the raise your hand feature. And if you're on the phone, we ask that you use *9 if you would like to make a comment or raise your hand so you can be recognized. I'd just also like to remind folks that there's other ways to get feedback. You can go to mbta.com /forging ahead or through our community liaison team at public engagement at mbta.com. There you can talk to our community liaisons. They can take your testimony and answer any other questions that folks may have regarding our service proposals. Again, we really encourage folks to give us this feedback because we will be using this to help make some of our decisions over the next couple of weeks. And on the chat, there's a link with all that information as well that's just been posted. So. I just see that there is a clarifying question. Are you open to reconfiguring routes?
So I think the short answer is yes. I think all public comment is being accepted. There are in other districts or regions where looking at combining various routes or making slight modifications to routes as well, depending on some of the services changes that are also going to be in that area and recognizing access to transit. So I would certainly say if someone has a suggestion that they should please feel free to pass that information along to us.
Thank you. Deputy General Manager, Mr. Scott Page, I'm going to unmute you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right, so we got another member of the Carmen's Union speaking up tonight, and I'm happy to do so. I spoke the other night at the public hearing, the formal public hearing about the Mission Hill streetcar. I realize that's not the service district that we're talking about, but since we have some open time, the messaging in these proposals and the messaging in these meetings is, I think, confusing and vague. And there's some confusing and vague language, particularly regarding when services and certain services will return. Now, I live on a streetcar line that the T has been trying to kill for longer than I've been alive. It wasn't a surprise to me that this was on your list, and it wasn't a surprise to me that it's not anywhere in the returning to service modes that have been put forward. So when they say that most service cuts are temporary and they're designed to be temporary, not only do I have a really hard time believing that, I have a really hard time buying into the premise that the T has any intention of returning my line, particularly, sadly, considering that you just paid a bunch of money to rebuild it. So when you say certain services, might not be part of the let's bring it back category, how do we know which ones those are? And when will we know which ones those are? So that's my question.
So Scott, thank you for your comments, and for folks that are just to clarify for folks that are listening in, Scott is referring to the last 4 or 5 stops along the E line, and the part of the proposal that the MBTA has put forward is eliminating service on those stops. We have a bus route, the Route 39, that runs parallel along Huntington Ave to the streetcar, and the streetcar stops themselves are inaccessible, where we have customers board and alight vehicles in the middle of the roadway, which is something that we have continued to wrestle with internally as it relates to what is our future plan going to be to make those stops accessible. So Scott, I think you asked a very good question, which is, when is service coming back? On one of the slides that Mike went through tonight, there are various service proposals on items that would be brought back, and what the value of those services are. We are still collecting comment and getting comment brought back in. I think as it relates to and no decision has been finalized yet on what changes are going to be implemented. As it relates specifically to the green line and why you don't see that on the slide, I didn't prepare those slides, but I'm pretty sure that because we have the Route 39 supplemental service that is running parallel to those few stops, that essentially provides a duplicative services literally right there at the same stops. And as it relates to transit access, I think the teams feel, as it relates to being efficient fiscally, that because there is a duplicate service there, that you could change to the 39 and then transfer over there, which would make it a lower priority than some of these other areas where we do know that there may be creating situations where we are removing transit access to various transit critical populations. Now, as it relates to this change being permanent, no, this is nothing. I am certainly not aware of this being a permanent change to suspend service on the back end of the E branch. That is certainly something that I'm not aware of. You are right. It is something that the agency has struggled with probably for longer than I've been around here, and but certainly. There is no plan for this change to be a permanent change.
Thank you, Deputy General Manager. I have a clarifying question before we go on to the next person who's raised their hand, so bear with me a second. The clarifying question is, who is affected by the 7 routes that will be eliminated with high essential need but low ridership in not fully alternative routes? Do we know those riders' needs and how they will be served?
I'm sorry, Angel. Can you read that one more time? I missed that.
Yep. Who is affected by the 7 bus routes that will be eliminated with high essential need, but low ridership and not fully alternative routes? Do we know those riders' needs and how they will be served?
So I think that that is a really good question. We know the boardings and alightings of all of our customers for our bus routes. And in this particular case, we do know the boardings and alightings for these particular cases. And really, this is a situation where we do know that the ridership is extremely low on these routes where we're proposing to do these route eliminations, and that it goes along with that this is a difficult choice and that this is not an easy choice. And I think with any route that you would propose to eliminate, there will always be, with any route that you choose to eliminate, I guess there is always a tough choice. And I know I'm not really answering the question, and I apologize, but I think that again, we do know the boardings and alightings, and I think this is just one of those difficult choices that we have to make as it relates to just being fiscally responsible with really the low ridership that we are seeing on those particular routes.
Thank you, Deputy General Manager. I am going to ask to unmute Mr. Patrick Hogan. Mr. Hogan.
Hello?
Mr. Hogan, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
All right.
Yeah, so my question sort of piggybacks on what Scott Page had to say. I seen in the proposals on service being brought back potentially, but nothing on the 25 bus routes that were eliminated. If you could reflect on that, Jeff, for me, I'd appreciate that. And also, no one has seemed to ask the question as to what do these savings mean in manpower? What do the layoffs look like? Because no one's touched on that. And what's my membership looking at? And if you could touch on that, Jeff, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Sure. So, and for everyone here, Pat Hogan is also a delegate business agent for Local 589. And so a couple questions. First, routes for elimination. A lot of these routes, again, are really low ridership routes. And when you see the slide that lists the proposals for reinvestment or bringing back in, the reason why those are not included on this one particular list is they're a lower priority, just like the back half of the E-line, or really the last 5 stops of the E-line. Not to say that there is no plan to bring those routes back, but certainly with those particular routes, one of the questions we got asked earlier tonight is the MBTA looking at changing service or modifying works? I think we even had a representative elected that gave some suggestions. Pat, I know you're very familiar with the MBTA's bus network redesign program, and that network redesign program is doing an overall look at the entire bus network, and with the bus network really looking at the productivity of each of our various bus routes and looking at where we can make changes in order to make these buses more efficient. Now, obviously, the COVID pandemic has completely turned a lot of our planning upside down as it relates to that network redesign process. But some of these routes that we are eliminating now may come back looking a little bit differently, just because of they may have been identified through the network redesign process as being a route that we could potentially change to make it a little bit more productive, but also making it better serving to the communities that they operate in. So that is a very high level answer to those 25 routes that are being eliminated broadly across the system. But that right now, again, some of these routes may come back looking a little bit different than they're being operated today. And when we should say this as well, when the time comes and we are going to be proposing changes to these routes, we will come back out to you, we will talk to you, we will solicit your feedback, and we will let you all know well in advance of what we're thinking, and we'll give you an opportunity to give us feedback as well on some of those proposed changes through the network redesign process. As it relates to employees and the impact to employees, I think I mentioned at my opening remarks that this is part of a three-part three-pronged approach. One of the prongs for the first piece is just some internal changes. The internal changes themselves are going to be looking at various contracts and services, and even executive levels of staffings, and there is a level of essentially budget cuts that are going to be made internally within the MBTA. Then the second piece is looking at capital reallocation and using our capital funds, or some of our capital funds, to help the MBTA reimburse us for operating personnel who are currently working and doing capital work, but that are going to be used to help support us, and then taken off the operating budget and be supported by capital budgets. In addition to that, some of our capital funds we are allowed to use them for systems and infrastructure maintenance. So we're proposing to temporarily do that and reallocate those funds to help support some of the gap in the operating budget there. The last piece is the service planning, which you can see here on the pie chart, is affected by these service changes. And what Pat Hogan was alluding to is that essentially these cost savings come from labor and the reduction in labor costs within the organization. So as it relates to quantifying this, from strictly your members and your members who are operating our trains, buses, and trolleys, that number is somewhere around the 350 range. And the exact details have not been completely worked out yet, Pat, but we are about in the 350 employee range for employees in the bus operator, streetcar motor person, and motor person ranks.
Thank you, Deputy General Manager. Again, if folks would like to speak and be recognized, we ask that you use the raise your hand feature. And if you're on the phone, we just politely ask that you use *9 to raise your hands and speak and be recognized. We will be here till 8 o'clock as we have promised. And again, we really do want to hear from folks to help us inform our feedback through these proposals.
Maybe while we're waiting too, Angel, if that's all right, I want to just follow up to what I just said, because even to say that number out loud as it relates to the impact to our employees, I think at being someone who has been at the MBTA now for almost 20 years, we do not want to cut service. We do not want to reduce service. That is not why we come to work every single day. And we share the MBTA and our employees. We are like a family, and we are a very tight, close-knit group, and all of us take a lot of pride in what we do every day. So I want to certainly pass along to everyone that this is not a process that is a pleasant process, and is something that we certainly can appreciate everyone's concerns with what we are presenting tonight and what we're discussing. And as it relates to the union representatives that represent our workforce, certainly we are very hopeful that we are going to continue to work and collaborate together as we go forward to think of ideas of where we can continue to potentially save additional money, but also just know from a management standpoint that this is not an easy conversation for us either.
Thank you, Deputy General Manager. The next question here, hand raised, I see Mr. Paul Coombs. Mr. Coombs?
Yes, thank you for recognizing me. My name is Paul Coombs. I'm with the Lynn chapter of Neighbor to Neighbor, Massachusetts, as well as the Newland Coalition. Thank you for this presentation. There's a lot of very good information here. And of course, we appreciate the opportunity to make comments. I'm just wondering with all of this, I'm still not sure that this is going to be enough to close the shortfall and that at some point the other shoe is going to drop and you'll be coming back to us with proposed rate increases. Is that true? And if so, when do you think that will be?
So no, we are not proposing a fare increase at this time. That is absolutely something that the general manager has held firm with, and our board has also held firm with. We are not proposing a fare increase at this time.
Do you anticipate it in the future, though?
Certainly, I think the MBTA has the MBTA in the future. Certainly, over the next several years, yes, I'm sure the MBTA will be doing and moving forward with a new fare increase. I am not aware of a plan to increase fares, but so I could certainly not say tonight that we are never going to have a fare increase again at the MBTA. But certainly, as it relates to this existing issue that we have today, this budget gap that we're facing for fiscal 21 and fiscal year 22, there is no plan for a fare increase to help offset that budget gap.
Thank you.
Mr. Again, folks, we are here for till 8 o'clock. If you would like to be recognized, and we ask that you, if you're by phone, to raise your hand by using *9. And if you would like to speak, just use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. We're here to hear from folks and to take that into consideration. And you can also use go to mbta.com/forging ahead, where you can provide comments and gather information and speak to our community liaison team to further flush out impacts that could be in your community. I have a clarifying question here. What's involved in a community setting up its own bus system, such as the Cape Ann Transit Authority, which operates a small fleet of smaller vehicles throughout the area? I'm told that a community that is within the MBTA cannot do this. Can you explain?
So we work very closely with a lot of our neighborhood and really abutting transit agencies, and frankly, we do work very closely as well with a lot of our transit agencies that partner or abut our service area. Cape Ann obviously being one of those transit agencies. I am not familiar with the specifics on what it would take to form your own local authority. So I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Thank you, Deputy General Manager. Again, folks, if you would like to be recognized, we ask that you use the raise your hand feature here on Zoom. And then if you would like to, if you're on the phone and would like to be recognized, please use the *9 feature. Deputy General Manager Gonaville and Mr. Mueller, I just would ask if we could explain to folks what we plan on doing with the feedback in detail and kind of the process what we'll be doing internally a little bit, and then sharing that with the board.
Sure, I'll take that, Mike. So a couple of things. We are, for those who watched the board meeting yesterday, and I think Director Cornegay, who's joined us tonight, made a request that so the authority's original plan was to present on December 7th a set of service scenarios that then the board would look to adopt. I think Director Cornegay last on Monday requested that we potentially look at adding at least an additional week's worth of time to give everyone, including the board members, an opportunity to one, review the feedback that we've received, and two, begin to look at various scenarios or options along with the various proposals that have been made. So what our team is doing right now is compiling all the information. So everything that comes into us through each of these meetings, all the information that's being provided to us through the various outlets, including the feedback form that you can see here, are all being compiled, summarized, and put together in packages. That is being given to senior leadership, senior management at the MBTA, as well as is going to be given to the board. Our plan is to give feedback to the board publicly, to give a summary of I'm sorry everyone, I'm tired, to give a summary of all the feedback that we've received to the board on the 7th, and following that, I believe we will probably be giving also some recommendations based upon the feedback, and ultimately either the board will choose to approve on the 7th, or we could have further discussions on the meeting on the 14th. But the next public discussion on this will be at the MBTA's December 7th board meeting.
Thank you, Deputy General Manager, for that helpful information. Again, we are here till 8 o'clock. Folks would like to be recognized and speak. We ask that you use the press *9 on your phone if you're joining us by phone, or raise your hands using the raise your hand feature on Zoom. Again, I would encourage folks to if they'd like to participate, to raise their hand using the raise your hand feature. We really do want to hear your feedback regarding our proposals. So I am going to ask Deputy General Manager Gonaville to provide some closing remarks for tonight. Again, we will be here till 8 o'clock as we had promised. And I would just quickly like to ask Deputy General Manager Gonaville to provide some closing remarks for us today. Deputy General Manager.
Thank you, Angel, and certainly not to put her on the spot, but Director Cornegay, I don't know if you wanted to provide just a couple closing remarks, and then I can certainly add to that at the end if you wanted to.
I think that you have adequately said everything that we are struggling with. We do not at all enjoy this exercise and are watching external events as they happen and really think that it is our responsibility to be prudently looking at what may be ahead in terms of financial challenges while we try to address ways that we can avert that, to make sure that there's a T to be here for everyone for the long term. I want people to please keep in mind that we think of this as a temporary measure to deal with some temporary challenges, and are really working to be as flexible as possible. And you know, as Jeff described, the staff is really working hard to maintain the service, particularly for those who are most in need, and really being sensitive about not just the riders, but the employees as well. So we're going to be looking hard at this, understanding that there is a timeline for how these things have to happen, and really, really appreciate all of the comments that everyone has said over the past several weeks. And I know that myself and other board members who have been attending these are really taking into account what people are saying, and looking forward to the 7th, because I know the staff is as well, and some of those things will be reflected in an updated plan.
Thank you, Director Cornegie. And just to certainly add to to closing here. One, we appreciate everyone's remarks, so thank you. If anyone wishes to also submit further feedback, I know we've posted the link here, but one of the easiest things to do is just go to our website, mbta.com. When you get to the homepage, you'll see that there are three major headings. One is Forging Ahead, which is the name that we have given this process. When you click on that major heading, you'll get all of the various different service proposals that are being discussed and we went through here tonight. But you'll also see a link there to provide feedback, and it will directly link you to giving your comments right back to us, and we will be getting those comments. Also, Mike has just put up on the screen here the list of additional public meetings that are happening. So certainly, if you wish to, again, present your testimony virtually, we welcome you to please come in and participate in any of these other meetings. So thank you, and everyone have a good evening. Angel?
Thank you, Deputy General Manager. Folks, we will still be here for the next 9 minutes. So if you'd like to raise any other comments or concerns, please feel free to share them. We can use the raise your hand feature on Zoom, or you can, if you're on the phone, you can use *9. I see one raised hand. Miss Kathy Paul. Ms. Paul? Ms. Paul, I've just asked to unmute you.
Right there.
Hello?
Ms. Paul?
You hear?
Yes, we can hear you.
What's wrong with the T pushing state legislators to pass progressive revenue to save the T? There's federal money out there. Other states are getting it. Why can't we? No answer.
No, I'm sorry, Kathy. I was just thinking about what to say. I mean, certainly, we have heard a lot from our elected officials and our elected delegation, this is certainly an issue that they have spoken up, representing each of their constituents to us, the authority, and certainly have expressed their concerns of what we're doing. Again, this is an issue that we're facing due to the loss of revenue that the MBTA has had through the pandemic because of the loss of ridership. So, I think that's probably the best that I can answer your question right now, Kathy.
Thank you very much. Again, I'd like to also say that we will be holding, we have 3 more public meetings. We have a system-wide meeting on December 2nd, which is next Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. We have a meeting next week, public meeting for the Merrimack Valley on December 1st, which is next Tuesday. And then we have a meeting for Bristol region next Monday from 6 to 8 p.m. as well. So please, we do encourage you to visit our website, mbta.com/forgingahead, and continue to provide us feedback and continue to be engaged, because we do take these comments seriously and we appreciate everyone's feedback. So if you do have something you'd like to say, we do have 5 minutes left. I encourage you to use the raise your hand feature on Zoom, or to, if you're on the phone, to use *9. I see a hand raised, Ms. Kathy Paul again. I'll unmute you.
Hello, yes, we elected those elected officials. And they're saying, yes, they understand. But in reality, they're not working for us. There's a reason they're where they are. We elected them. They're supposed to listen to us. And I'm sure there's people out there that know we've got to get these legislators to get up and to do their job. We need to get that money. There's money out there. Other states are getting it. Why can't we? There's no reason. Yeah, they can keep talking to us and telling us, yeah, we understand there's a problem, but that's not solving it. We all need to band together. Everybody needs to call their legislators. And we need to get, it's not impossible. If other state people can get, other states can get it, we can get it. We're Massachusetts. Come on, people, wake up. Thank
So I'd just like to say happy Thanksgiving to everyone and thank you for joining us today. We're very grateful for the opportunity to hear from folks on their thoughts on our Forging Ahead proposal. It would encourage everyone to continue to continue providing feedback via our Forging Ahead website. We will we'll close this off today. Again, I'd like to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you.
On behalf of the MBTA, thank you again for joining us this evening, and everyone have a happy, safe, and healthy Thanksgiving. Good night.